with Jeff Harris of Reference Analog out of Moore, Oklahoma.
Overhang is essentially the point on the setup jig that you're trying to get your stylus to fall exactly on that mark. And that's kind of your overhang, so how far your pivot to spindle distance kind of helps dictate your overhang. And then you want to set your angle with your protractor. And then your angle for that is actually twisting the cartridge like this so that it is straight and overhang's correct. And then your tilt is going to be your azimuth, so it's entering the groove correctly. And then your VTA is that stylus adjustment doing that. And then you've got anti-skate, which anti-skate is a factor of the the physics that with a spinning object, when you put something on it, it wants to pull it. The farther out you are on a record, the higher forces that are being pulled. As you get closer, the less forces. So generally, you need an anti-skate device that changes as it goes inward.
So I did have another question as far as setting the tone arm and everything. What is vertical tracking angle?
So you've got a bunch of different names for things, but VTA, vertical tracking angle, is essentially this. So it's the up and down of the back, and it kind of helps set your stylus rake angles and stuff. So basically with a VPI, I'll have to unlock that. Make sure these two screws are unlocked before you move it. But with a VPI, this is your VTA adjustment. So you can wheel it up and down and change your angles, vertical tracking. So that is literally the up going, the back going up and down. And then you've got azimuth. And whenever you're done and you get it to where you want it, you lock these two back down. And that, I was talking a while ago about nothing moving around and shifting in there. Tightening those two basically locks the system together. So there's no vibration or no movement. Your azimuth is essentially your pitch. So that is going to be the side-to-side pitch. And so if you think about your stylus, as you change your azimuth, your stylus is going to be doing that. So you want it to be going in accurately to the groove and tracing the walls correctly.
Okay, so azimuth is side to side and vertical tracking angle is up and down.
Yeah, and they talk about a 92-degree rake angle and stuff like that with a USB microscope and sitting the 92 degrees. That is kind of done with the setting for the VTA. So that's what you set with that.
Got it.
Analog is kind of one of those things that if you adjust one, it kind of adjusts the other two. So you kind of have to, I always do a simple setup and then kind of go back and start tweaking on everything until I get everything locked in correctly.
It's kind of finicky.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't necessarily say finicky as much as exacting. It's a very detailed thing, that you're working with. So anyway, and then you've got your overhang and your geometry angles and everything else when it comes to the stylus. So, your overhang is essentially the point on the setup jig that you're trying to get your stylus to fall exactly on that mark. And that's kind of your overhang, so how far your pivot to spindle distance kind of helps dictate your overhang. And so anyway, that's how far out your stylus is. And then you want to set your angle with your protractor. And then your angle for that is actually twisting the cartridge like this so that it is straight and overhang's correct. And then your tilt is going to be your azimuth, so it's entering the groove correctly. And then your VTA is that stylus adjustment doing that.
And this is something you're going to show everybody when you're setting this up.
We'll do a setup video and we'll kind of go back over everything. But that's essentially the basics. And then you've got anti-skate, which anti-skate is a factor of the physics that with a spinning object, when you put something on it, it wants to pull in. So the farther out you are on a record, the higher forces that are being pulled. As you get closer, the less forces. So generally, you need an anti-skate device that changes as it goes inward. So it gets less force, which is the reason why like VPI has this one. It starts at a different spot. Then as the tone arm moves, it actually, you know, kind of decreases its efforts.
Is that like a weight or what is it?
Yeah, it's a weighted system, and you've got basically a string, a fishing line, if you will.
That's really tiny.
That goes on, and then you change the amount. You change the amount, and I'll just pull it over so you can see it kind of move. So, anyway, and I may have had that backwards as far as the forces, as far as like which one's greater, I don't know. But anyway, one of those two.
Okay.
But but with anti-skate, it's such a finicky topic. Some manufacturers say don't use it at all. Some say, oh, you absolutely have to use it. I think the biggest problem with anti-skate is that we don't have really an accurate way to do it. You know, right now there's no tools that you really can buy except for the software, like Analog Magic type software, which I do use. But the Analog Magic software, you actually put it in the groove and you register the amount of distortion that you're getting on your channels, your right and left. And then based on that distortion, you add and take away anti-skating until you reach the lowest amount of distortion with them closest together. So if one channel is getting a ton of distortion, then you know that you've got too much or too little, and you know, vice versa. So you want them to be close together and, you know, as low as you can. And generally kind of what I find is that 12-inch arms, if you've got like 2 grams of tracking, which is in the Analog Magic software, it kind of says this. If you've got a 12-inch arm with like 2 grams of tracking force, then you're probably not going to need anti-skate. If you've got a shorter arm, then you're probably going to need some anti-skate. You know, and if you talk to a lot of the cartridge rebuilder guys, you know, they'll say that that most people are putting on too much anti-skate, and so I generally lean toward the smaller side of the anti-skate numbers, but I generally just use the software and it kind of tells me where I'm at with it, and then I can adjust from there. But there's really no great way for people to do it at home without, you know, spending a lot of money or having somebody like me come out and actually measure it and go, okay, well, this is where you want to be on the anti-skating. Because a lot of people will try using a grooveless record or a mirror or something like that, and they'll put it on there and then they try to get it to where it stays perfectly center, you know, so it doesn't move on the mirror. And that's fine and dandy, except for the fact that you're not taking into account the groove.
Right.
And so, you know, there's aspects to, you know, to the friction being involved that you're not accounting for. And so that's not really an accurate way to do it. But you know, there's no real way that we've got that is being sold as tools on the market to, you know, to measure it, except for some of the high dollar software. And so, you know, anyway, but.
So for this one, you don't have to actually use the anti-skate. You could just take the fishing line off and not use it?
Yeah, and frankly, I generally just leave the fishing wire kind of hanging back there, and it, you know, it does fine. But you can technically take it off, and it just basically, if you take off your counterweight, you can undo a set screw, and that mechanism slides off the back of the tone arm.
I see.
So it's easily
That's
removed.
Interesting.
But yeah, I would generally just suggest to guys, like, if you're, you know, in those areas that I was talking about, a 12-inch arm with 2 grams of tracking force, I would probably just leave off your anti-skating and see what it sounds like. At the end of the day, the whole goal is to make it sound good. So if it doesn't sound good, then who cares what the measurements said? You know, the point is for it to sound good. So everything that we do, I always listen afterwards and verify, you know, with my ears, because software is great, tools are great, but at the end of the day, your ears are the best tool you've got. And so, you know, with VTA, a lot of, like, this is VTA on the fly, so you can be playing a record and you can adjust your VTA. Generally, I say, you know, be careful when doing so, because you're dealing with the tone arm right there. You don't want to bump things and whatnot. So, but it's VTA on the fly, so you can actually adjust it, listen, go up, adjust it some more, listen, adjust it, listen. And eventually you'll kind of find the sweet spot for your ear that you say, this is what I'm looking for. You know, and like we were discussing, there's ways with the microscope that you can set 92 degrees, you know, and stuff like that. And I guess the 92 degrees comes from, that's the angle that the record was cut at with the cutting lathe. But whatever the case, you know, at the end of the day, you use your ears. So, you know, if your ears say that that sounds perfect, then it sounds perfect.